We will finish then with this video that is the one related to postmodernism, and it's on the slide number 116 of the PowerPoint presentation. As you can see, well, they propose that it starts in 1945, that it's basically the ending of World War II. So there's a lot of discussion on it's it a continuation of modernism, as the name implies, post after modern. So it's just maybe just a slightly different trend, camouflage under the same skin, or it's a complete different thing. Well, let's say that one more time. It's a discussion that has not been solved, and I guess will not be. They propose that there are no more periods of literature after postmodernism. Of course, this is not necessarily true because there's a lot of new trends and let's say sub currents and tendencies that may be located into that one. But for the effect of our class, we're going to use postmodern as the last one. Um, well, let's say that in postmodernism, uh, people go completely nuts. If in the previous period we had this, um, let's say, initial trend to subvert the values and subvert the ideas and try to use the flow of consciousness and all these different things, when in postmodernism, what we have is a complete lack of meaning, right? What they propose in postmodernism is that uh, things, objects, understanding objects as either a work of art, a novel, or a painting, or a sculpture, or whatever, they have not inherent meaning, right? Like not because there's a book, for example, you're supposed to read it, right? You can use a book as a work of art in a different way. Um, and because of that, let's say that things can get a little bit more and more and more difficult to be understood. Um, this is also due to the fact that there's an influence, just like in the previous period, there was a high influence of um, philosophy. In this one, we have a very important influence of psychology and psychoanalysis, right? So we go beyond the realm of the physical. Of course, that philosophy does a little bit of that, goes to the realm of ideas, but here we're talking about um, subconscious desires. We're talking about dreams. We're talking about hallucinations and all this spectrum of mental connotations that, as we can remember, many times don't make absolute sense. So if you think about a dream, you know that they are always weird, that you have a certain idea of where you are, but you don't know why, or even you have completely unexplainable situations, even though there's a certain amount of logic into them, but it's difficult to replicate it and sometimes even to remember that. So we have all these different things, and there's some other important philosophers or psychologists or linguists that take part in this in this movement, such as Camus or Derrida, Jacques Derrida, or Foucault, Michel Foucault, and talking about his control and supervision. Well, all these different things. So one of the main ideas of this period is deconstruction, right? It means basically that you sort of destroy the traditional meaning of a work of art, of a book, of a tale, of a poem, or of, in fact, any object of reality, and try to give it a different meaning, right? Of course, and this is more of a personal opinion, I think that when it all started, it made some sort of sense. It had a political agenda and an artistic one, and there were like many different things that were interesting since the point of view of art, right? Eventually, this degenerated a little bit into um, some things that were roughly or that I would roughly call art, right? Such as conceptual art, for example, in which there is no painting, but there's like some sort of setting, for example. So I don't know, let's say a urinal, yes, like in the case of the champ, or for example, if we're talking about um, I don't know, an exposition about an empty dish uh, to try and represent the starvation and hunger of the world. Yes, well, things like that, right? I think that this sort of conceptual art, one more time, this is a personal opinion, is not really satisfying to me. I have never feel attracted to it, not even by curiosity, because I think that if the work of art doesn't explain itself and you require the author to write a text to explain it or to explain it to you orally, well, I don't know. I think that's not so worthy, right? One thing is that the work of art is difficult to understand, and the other one is that it is completely unable to explain itself. But well, let's say that this is a little bit of a degeneration of postmodernism, and well, the main idea of this is ambiguity and difficulty to understand in certain things, or simply, as we will see with the authors in a minute, a complete let's say opposition to the traditional values of the world. So of a particular trend in art. Let's go then into the final slide to talk about the authors. I just want to mention a couple of them. So as you can see, Gabriel Garcia Marquez in here, it's included into postmodernism. One more time, you will find other people who classify him as a modernist. But let's call about 100 years of solitude and this artificial term that they invented to describe his literature and that actually doesn't exist per se, that it's magic realism. So that is a good example of postmodernism. Let's say a society that it's has certain things that are undeniably real, like the culture and their behavior and their traditions, and there is a mix of that with fantasy and let's say the possibility of doing things that are not possible in real world, but that people and even simple people like the ones that are presented in many of the works of Garcia Marquez, they accept it as true, right? So the yellow butterflies, for example, of Mauricio Babilonia, or we have a lot of the different things that happen in there in some of the other cases, like the powers of the gypsies, like a lot of things that, let's say, under normal conditions are not possible, but that are accepted in there. So that's a good example in there. Um, let's talk about, for example, Margaret Atwood and The Handmaid's Tale. That's also a postmodernist one, and for the ones who have either read the book or know that right now there's a TV series about it, and on how women are oppressed by a totalitarian um, society and are made one more time to be renounced to their rights and one more time used as simply objects of reproduction. Um, so there's this dystopic society that she presents. And finally, we have, for example, here Bukowski, right? One more time, let's say that this author is not really difficult to understand. It's a little bit linear, if you want to call it that way, when compared um, to other writers of postmodernism. Nevertheless, he talks on, manages something that's being coined as dirty realism. So he presents a lot of situations that may be disgusting for the usual reader of poetry, for the usual reader of tales of novels, and many of his works are autobiographical, and he talks about alcohol and sex and let's say complete lack of traditional values and living a life that it's a complete mess, in which the the romantic relationships that he has are completely, um, let's say, destructive, but nevertheless, he craves for that sort of relationship, for those sort of women, even though they make his life miserable or difficult. But again, they are also a source of inspiration. So there's a lot of these different things, right? So let's say that normally when people think of a poem, there's the idea, at least, that if it's a love poem, it's supposed to be delicate or present metaphors or present some different things related to that one. Just to finish, I'm going to read you aloud one of the poems by Bukowski to give you an idea of what or how could it be a postmodernist, or postmodern poem. Just to finish that